The bullet tore a thin strip of flesh from his cheekbone, drove into the brick wall behind him. He turned a corner, cut swaths through the steam rising from sewer grates, smoky ghosts wrapping around his skinny legs, dissipating. Gone. More bullets flew past his ears as he ducked around another corner, legs pumping hard, breath coming in thick rasps. He didn't know this section of the city very well, so it was just a matter of time. Always just a matter of time. Voices, loud, harsh, guttural bursts exploding from thin lips, wide mouths. Find him. Fuck him up. The words didn't matter, but their speakers did. The people who spoke these words could run hard and for a very long time. Hi there. My name is C. Mary Hultman, and this is The Guild, the podcast for the Writers, Artists, and Readers Guild, a place on the internet where we celebrate all art forms and where you can contribute if you'd like. That was an excerpt from A Perfect Machine by Brett Savory, published by Angry Robot Books. Brett is on the show today, and it was an interesting interview. We cover a lot of topics, and it was good. The audio might be a little weird. Was having some issues with the recording equipment, but hopefully you can hear everything and you get a lot out of it. It was fun. Brett's an easy guy to talk to. So I think without further ado, we'll get to the interview, and there'll be some information at the end of this. So I just, finished reading A Perfect Machine a couple of weeks ago, and I've seen that there's been a lot of buzz around it lately.
Yeah. Good.
So how are you dealing with that? Because I saw that you've written a couple of things beforehand on your website, but is this the first where you're getting like some kind of recognition from like Barnes and Noble and?
I had my first novel that came out about 10 years ago. It's called In and Down, and it was through a small Canadian publishing house, and it didn't do particularly well because it's really weird. Like, it's like David Lynch meets Ray Bradbury. Like, it's a really strange book, and very personal, and just about two brothers. So it's a very compact, kind of strangely told story with an unreliable narrator. And through a small Canadian house. So I really love the book, and there's a bunch of people who really like it as well, but it didn't get particularly well recognized, and so in terms of like a lot of reviews and a lot of sales and all that kind of stuff, but it's not really why I write anyway, so I'm not overly concerned with that. And then I did another book that came out, I think, in that same year, called another novel called The Distance Traveled, which is completely different. It's a horror comedy in the vein of like The Evil Dead kind of thing. So completely different kind of thing. And that was just a limited edition of like 300 or 400 copies, released by Necro Publications in Florida. Okay. And then a year later, I think I had a short story collection out, No Further Messages, and then a year after that, we started Chizine Publications. So I started to publish a bunch of people and not really concentrate on my own stuff anymore. So I had started A Perfect Machine, but it was actually called Running Beneath the Skin, based on a short story I had in a Penguin anthology called Outsiders. So it was originally called that, and then when Angry Robot bought it, they wanted to change the title to something else because of how close it is to Michelle Faber's Under the Skin. Okay. So sure, fine. So we did that, and but yeah, there was a 10-year gap it's actually really nice to have something out there that's my own again. Because it's very gratifying to publish other people, and that's really great, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. But it's obviously not the same as when you write something and it gets out there and it gets reviewed and everything. So it's actually really nice though, because I'm sort of used to that whole I seem to write stuff that divides people in terms of love and hate, because I get a lot of 5 stars and I get a lot of 1 stars.
Okay.
So yeah, either love it or you hate it, and I think maybe I'm doing something right then. I don't know. I mean, I guess it all depends on what you think is of doing something right. But I am actually really gratified, because I'm happy with the book, and so when I was actually kind of scared of how I would feel, because it's been 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, how am I going to take the reviews? Because I remember when my first novel came out, they stung a lot more, because it's my first one. But like 10 years on, and having published 100 and something books through Chizine, and seeing all those reviews,
mm-hmm.
It helped to kind of like inure me against it. It thickened my skin, I think, a little more.
Okay.
Because I realized, that the reviews, like reader reviews as well as critical reviews, are it's just one person, and if it hits them in the right spot, then they give you a great review. If it doesn't, then you don't get a great review. And I'm exactly the same way. Like when I buy books for Chizine, if it's great, I buy it. If I don't think it's great, I don't buy it. So it's an entirely subjective thing, and so having that sort of like broader scope on how reviews are and how they work, just sort of made it easier for when this book came out, and I would see somebody hammer it, like Publishers Weekly did, and I was like, oh, okay, so, and then I actually was like, I think they hammered my first book too 10 years ago, and I went back and looked, and yes, they did. Right, so at least they're consistently, like hating it,
mm-hmm.
hating the work I do. So at least they got that going for them. But to counterbalance that, there was a really lovely Barnes and Noble review, and there've been a bunch of really nice ones. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of take it all in stride and carry on. Just like write what you write, right? Like that's all you can do. You can't try and write for everybody, because that's not going to work out, and you're just going to end up hating the book yourself, right? So yeah.
So I was talking to my brother-in-law today about your book, and he was kind of asking, what it was about, and he said, "Oh, it sounds a lot like Running Man," and I said, "Well, yeah, it's kind of like Running Man if Philip K. Dick had read or written Running Man." Is that kind of when you were thinking about the story? Now you said that you'd been living with the book or the story for a while. Was that where did you find inspiration? Because in the beginning, when I first started reading it, it felt like, yes, this is kind of like a Running Man style. At least the movie, not maybe so much the book Running Man.
I don't think so. It never even really occurred to me until you just said that now. If I had to compare it to anything, or stuff that was in my head at the time, would probably be the Tetsuo movies. The Iron Man movies. Because I watched those in the middle of, I think, writing it. So it was definitely in my head. And Cronenberg, I think, is in there. The whole body horror aspect of him like changing into what he does. That's definitely there, but not on the same sort of a visceral level, I don't think, than what Cronenberg does. But I can see the Running Man stuff, because they are runners, and I call them that, and that's kind of what they're doing. And I guess it does kind of have a bit of a game show kind of quality on a cosmic level.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I can see that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
where would you, I mean, what would you say would have been your inspiration for the story? Otherwise, I mean, when you talking about Cronenberg and Tetsuo, was Dick? I mean, has Dick ever influenced you? Because I felt, and maybe it's because I'm colored, I enjoy Jeff Noon. He's always been since I first came in contact with Jeff Noon through Vert, and now I know that Angry Books is going to publish his next book.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Which is actually exciting. Actually, for me, it's exciting because he's actually publishing something. It's been years since he did anything. But that kind of like, and I think I should explain what I mean by Jeff Noon, there being a Jeff Noon quality, is because there's a lot of stuff that's left open. It feels like there's a lot of stuff in the book that you never really explain. And Jeff Noon was always a master at that.
Okay. Actually, that's good to know, because I know the name, but I've never actually read anything by him. So I'll definitely have to check him out, because I love that, the unreliable narrator, the ambiguity, not over-explaining stuff and letting the reader bring their own experiences into the book. I really like that. And I like that when I read a book like that, so I try and write like that, so that people, like me, will enjoy it. And also, I mean, I just don't have that sort of, it's not how I generally write. It's not my style, I guess. It doesn't really occur to me to answer everything, because I just assume that people who are going to enjoy it are going to be okay with the fact that I'm not over-explaining everything. And if you need it to be over-explained or explained to whatever degree that you're usually comfortable with as a reader, then it's not going to work for you, and that's totally fine. I mean, I don't expect it to work for everyone. But in terms of Philip K. Dick, I'd only seen movies based on his stuff until I think 2 or 3 years ago, so I can't claim it was any sort of influence on a literary level, because I never read anything until then. I just knew of him, and I'd seen Blade Runner, and I'd seen various adaptations. So maybe there was a flavor of him in there, just from movies. But like, I don't really know how much of that translates. But yeah, I remember I started in 2004, I think it was, and then we got doing CCP a lot, and I just sort of like put it on a shelf, and then I think a year or two ago I was just going through some old files, and I was like, oh yeah, Running Beneath the Skin, I remember that. I started that as a novel. And so I opened it up, and it was about a third of the way, it was like 30,000 words or so. And then I went into the properties area, and I saw that I started it over 10 years ago. And I was like, what? and that's what kind of like reawakened, I was like, holy shit, I can't have not, put anything out in that long. And then I just started thinking, I was like, yes, it has been. Like, there's been a couple of short stories here and there, and, like nothing much though. And definitely no longer works. And so I thought, okay, well, the only way I'm going to actually, finish this thing is if I stop looking at Chizine stuff for a little while. So I just told my wife and the other staff people who needed to know, I guess, that I was going to just take 2 weeks and hammer it out and just like finish it and not look at any Chizine stuff. And so I did that. I just took 2 weeks, and I just did the rest of the book, and that was the initial draft. And that felt good to finally have something out again, or finished again. I mean, and then I just kind of carried on from there. But yeah, I mean, it the influences are probably wide and varied, but yeah, I can only really kind of pinpoint Cronenbergian feelings and Tetsuo. Those were sort of my two main grounds that I pulled stuff from.
Okay. Like I feel like creativity is kind of like kinetic energy. It has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can, in my case, kind of ruin your life because I'll start making up stories instead.
Right.
And
yeah, that's not good.
And if I don't get that creative energy out somewhere, it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
So it can be from just sitting a couple of minutes working like on a Photoshop project, or whatever. How does that work for you, creativity wise? Now you've worked. I saw that on Facebook. I think your zine, whatever you want to call it, has been around for like 20 years.
Yeah. I started it in '97. And then my wife, Sandra, came on as the poetry editor 2 years later. And yeah, so I started it, back then. As a webzine, it hasn't existed since about 2012, but it went until then. And by then, we'd already gotten the print arm of it going in 2008. So, that was kind of like taking up all the resources that we had. So we just decided to concentrate on doing that because, again, there's just not enough hours in the day to do it all, right? So we had to concentrate. We had to decide on what we wanted. And as a print, publishing, company, you at least stand a chance of making money as opposed to being a website, being a webzine without. Because we used to be sponsored by Leisure Books, and that went on for years and years. But then when they went under, we were sort of like, well, I just didn't want to go, like hunting around for sporadic ads, like just doing, like trying to make web banners for, various, gothic this or horror that or whatever, just like individual companies. That's a lot of legwork.
Yeah.
And we were sort of spoiled with Leisure because I would just do banners for their 2 new horror books that they did every month, and I would just pop them up at the site, and they would run at the site, and they would send me a check, and I would pay writers, right? So it was a really good deal.
Yeah.
And we ended up at the end of it, we were paying 7 cents a word, back in like 2005 or 6. So that was it went well until it didn't, because they went under. So, but so what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
So we channeled everything into the print publishing arm. So that's what we've been doing ever since. And yeah, so it'll be 10 years of the print arm in 2018. So we'll do something for that as well, I think. So yeah, it's good. But in terms of the original question you had, how do you channel the creativity, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, I'm not one of these writers who is one of these like I write or I die kind of guys. Like I don't have to write it. I don't feel the need. I don't feel the need to write every day. I don't have to. I've never had writer's block. Like I can go like several years without writing anything creatively, and then I go, okay, I'm going to write a story. Or like if someone asks me for one for an anthology, or if I know I have to get something done, I can just like plant my ass down and turn everything off and just sit, and it just comes out. Like I don't have any like writer's block sort of issues, So I've always been lucky in that respect for sure. But yeah, I don't have that overpowering driving need or ideas that like fill my head until I'm going to explode or anything like that. But maybe that's also because I'm in a band as well. So I play the drums for a metal band, and I've kind of always been in a band, So maybe that's where it's been going out. Like if there is that sort of like a kinetic energy that has to come out, maybe it's been going out there because I'm not writing. I have no idea, but it's certainly a possibility. But yeah, so I guess that answers that.
Yeah. when I was browsing the site, I saw that you guys had written something about genre fiction and whether it's dead or not, and I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit, because when I came in contact with A Perfect Machine, it says that it's supposed to be categorized as science fiction,
right?
And myself being a literary scholar as a base, we're kind of damaged by categorizing stuff. Or at least that's how we are educated until we get a voice of our own and understand how literature actually works.
Yeah.
And if one does that, if one looks at A Perfect Machine from a science fiction standpoint, or vantage point, it's not really science fiction because it doesn't use any of those aspects, which also once again harkens back a little bit to Jeff Noon, whose books are science fiction or even sometimes categorized as cyberpunk, but doesn't really have those elements. So what is your philosophy? Because obviously it's more speculative fiction, I would say. If you could, what is your philosophy on the science fiction aspect or genre fiction overall as it pertains to your work?
I think I would agree. It's not particularly. It's not really science fiction as you would sort of in terms of the trappings that everyone kind of expects of it. But I think why Angry Robot marketed it as that because they publish mostly science fiction. There's some fantasy. There's not a lot of horror, like horror.
It feels like there used to be more horror in Angry Robot. They'd have more horror, like Tim Wagner and stuff like that, but it seems like they've moved away from that.
Yeah, exactly. But as close as I would be able to categorize it, I would say it's an SF horror book, and only SF in that it's got robots. I mean, that's because everyone thinks, like, when you think of SF, you think of space, you think of robots, like you think of those kinds of things, like it's machines, all that kind of has an SF flavor to it. But in terms of the actual story and narrative, I would agree. It's not that at all. It's just me, one of the reviews actually kind of made me think of my own book in a different way, which was pretty interesting. The Toronto Star had a review of it in the paper like a couple weeks ago, I guess, a few weeks ago now, and they said that it's like a city as a lab experiment, and that is kind of the way I think of it, and that's why I don't place it in any particular city or even on Earth, or but it's very close. It's very close to our Earth, our planet, in terms of if you think of like any basic a city or a small town, you could kind of imagine it happening there.
Yeah.
Because and I don't particularly put it anywhere because it doesn't matter. It's just like whatever the reader can imagine as a city. That's fine. That's totally fine. It doesn't have to mirror anything here. So I mean, it's I kind of agree, and it was an interesting way to look from that review of looking at it as a lab experiment, and that kind of feeds into my ideas for the sequel to it too, because and obviously hint quite strongly that there is a multi-dimensional aspect to whoever is in control is not necessarily here, but it's obviously somewhere else, and they have vast powers, and we don't know like why they're doing this experiment or what it means or any of that kind of stuff, right? But I would get into that obviously, but there's a lot of, it's very open-ended, and I actually really like that about it, and it was interesting to see that review, basically talking about it, in that way, because I never really thought of it as a lab experiment until it was put in those exact terms, and then once I had that in my head, I was like, ooh, yeah, that's a cool idea.
Do you feel that you had to step back from it so not to reveal too much once you were done? Like, not go back and edit it and say, like, this is kind of strange. How will, people approach it when they read it? Do I have to work more? I mean, did you struggle with it being feeling incomplete in certain aspects, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand, that criticism, and it's a valid one, absolutely, because a lot of things are not answered, but I didn't want to answer them, and not even because I have ideas up for the sequel. It's just as a standalone piece, even if I was hit by a bus tomorrow and no sequel ever came, I would still be happy that book's there, because I think it does stand alone on its own, even with all its ambiguities and the unanswered questions and everything else, because, and this sounds, sort of airy-fairy or artsy-fartsy or whatever, but, in life, as people, as individual people, we don't get all the answers, and then we die, and you never get all the answers, as far as anyone knows, you don't get all the answers, and maybe we never will, but you still do things, and life still has got meaning, and you still carry on, and you still love things, and you still exist, right? Like you keep carrying on, even without all the answers. So I don't feel any need to do that in a piece of fiction either. It's kind of a mirror of that that's going on in my head in my daily life. I don't have all the answers in my daily life. I don't have all the answers in this universe I made. Right? So that's the end of that one.
No, and I mean, I think because also as well, I mean, if you go back again and talk about like what literary scholars say constitutes a good book or a good read is when it has holes in it, and I think well-placed holes. I mean, not too big of holes. But well-placed holes definitely allows your reader to fill in the blanks the way they want to. And I think A Perfect Machine works very well that way. It might, in some aspects, demand that the reader has some science fiction background or stuff like that to get the whole picture. I felt that it had a lot of aspects of not only science fiction in certain aspects, but also like the thriller or the noir genre. The way the story is told, with the thriller aspect, fast paced, moving forward all the time. And it felt, and this is me kind of analyzing it again right now, is that almost every single character has their own genre trope. I mean, Kylo is definitely more of a science fiction character, whereas Kree Bosch, I think his name, I don't know how you pronounce his name, is more of a noir character. Whereas the head of the Runners is more almost like a spy villain, a villain you'd see maybe like in James Bond.
Exactly,
So they all... And that kind of, they all meld into this melting pot, all these different genres, but represented by a character.
Exactly, yeah. That's a good way to put it. I never really thought about that when I was actually writing it, but now that you bring it up, that's a really good way to look at them. It wasn't intentional, but I'll take it.
That's how it is now.
That's and that's the answer I'm going to give in future interviews. I'm going to steal your answer.
There you go. But I mean, to go back to the discussion whether genre fiction is dead or not, what is your stance on it? I mean, I have a thought, definitely. But what is your thought?
I mean, I don't think it's dead. I don't think it'll ever actually go away in any meaningful sense of the word, because we've always had it. Like we've had it, like my wife Sandra says when we get talking about this kind of stuff, and she's the first stories that were ever told around campfires were probably horror. It was horror stories, like you're talking about, like the dark and the monsters in the woods or whatever. Like whatever fables, whatever like immediate dangers that they had. They would make up stories about them and where they came from and what they meant, and they would spin a narrative out of it. I like to teach like kids like to stay away from like certain things. There would be like a warning, story about that thing that they wanted to keep them away from. So this goes back since we started telling stories at all, and then we've always had it. But it's going to wax and wane, obviously. Like anything does. But it's just like you've got your vampire craze or your zombie craze, and they run their course and they go away for a while and they come back again. And it's I think genre fiction as a whole is never going to go away. It's always going to be here. Like I can't imagine how you could kill it. You could get rid of all the publishers and all the books. You could actually like burn all the books in the world, all the horror, all the SF, all the fantasy, anything that smacked of genre fiction. You could entirely erase it. You could erase it from the internet, and people would still tell the stories to each other. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then they'd start writing them again. Right. So I don't think you'll ever get rid of it.
Yeah. No, and I tell my students whenever because in the school where I work, we teach literature, literary history, and we talk about. I usually talk about like fiction, just regular fiction, as more of a construct than what genre fiction is. And from the school of literary scholar that I come from, which is more geared towards genre fiction and popular fiction. I mean, I was when I put forth my thesis, my paper, the person that was actually supposed to give me criticism or grade me was a man who was very heavy into, you're only supposed to read Jane Austen or Charles Dickens and everything else is crap. And
I had one of those teachers too.
And he told me afterwards, when he was supposed to tell me if I had passed or if I had failed, that, he said, I don't find that this area that you've chosen to study to be a viable area. It's not okay, but you've done your paper after all, it's correct. So I'm going to have to pass you. And wow. my tutor or my mentor who worked with me during my thesis, he gave me all the tools, and he was very much on the other side of, he said, genre fiction is where it's at, because that's actually the only way you can actually tell what people's desires were, how they felt, how they lived. General fiction can just tell you on the surface
exactly
what is happening, but never go into deep details.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes it more comfortable for people to tell what they're actually feeling or to comment on what's happening in society, because it's sort of like how Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, can really get at the heart of what's going on in America by joking about it, by making. It's an access point. It's a way in for us to feel more comfortable dealing with those sorts of things. And it's the same thing, I think, with genre fiction, is that instead of it just being, told to you in very straightforward, literary, like real world ways, which can make people uncomfortable and just immediately turn off. But if you've mapped it onto another world, and it's like it's used as a metaphor or what's the other word? A metaphor and like analogies, that sort of thing. When you do that, it just makes it more palatable. It makes it gives it it drives it home in a different way, I think. Yeah.
So that being said, if genre fiction is a reflection of our time, the time it was written, what does that say about A Perfect Machine? What is it? What did you try to reflect? when like in 50, 60 years or even 100 years, when students are supposed to read A Perfect Machine, and their teacher says you're supposed to look at what does it say about the time in which it was written. What would you say it says?
Wow. I don't know. That one's hard because I wasn't really trying to make it a book of a certain era or time. But that said, it can't help but be that because that's when it was written, right? So it's like it's irrefutably of its time in that way for sure. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure how it would be to be looked at, or what they would think I was going for. I'm not sure. I mean, I think maybe they would look at it as maybe a comment on the fact that you can never really know anything or the reasons why things happen. I mean, you can read a lot of stuff into it, I guess. In the PW review, even though they hammered it, they did say one thing that I thought was interesting, is that they said, well, we thought he was going to be going for some sort of a comment on our overmasculated. I don't know what the word is, but like masculinity, but over. Like making a comment on that in our society and where it sort of like leads us in the end. And I'm like, no, I wasn't thinking about that at all. So I'm glad you didn't get that out of it, because that wasn't where I was going anyway. But I mean, that said, that's what that particular reviewer had in his mind as to what he thought I was going for that, and that Toronto Star review that was like positive and thought I was going for the whole it's city as lab experiment, and I hadn't thought of that either, and yet he got that out of that book, so I really think that every person is bringing their own interpretations into that book. There's other books that are a lot more straightforward, and they give you every single answer, and it all wraps up in a nice tidy bow at the end, and so you have more of a consensus on what it actually means, because you can talk to other people, and because it was very well explained, you can sit and talk about what the meaning is, and it's gonna be like fairly close along a particular line. Whereas a book like A Perfect Machine or my first book, In and Down, or any sort of ambiguous ending, a book that has an ambiguous ending, you're going to have completely divergent views from almost every person that reads it, and it's because they have to bring a lot of their own experience into it, and so they're filling in a lot more holes on their own, and so it's completely different from the next guy, even if it's like the same age or the same background, like literary background or whatever it is. They're still gonna, I think, be bringing different interpretations to it, which I kind of like more. But that's just me.
Yeah, it is, and I think in a way, I think that's just what every author in the end maybe wants. That this book that I've published has become something very important to some people, not all people.
Exactly. Yeah. Like other people can just dismiss it out of hand because it doesn't hit them in a particular way. It's not their cup of tea, and that's totally fine, because there's a pile of books that aren't my cup of tea, and I'm not going to act like they are. Right? Everyone's got. It's all about subjectivity, and it's going to hit you or it's not going to hit you, and you can't take it personally, and because everyone is exactly the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're kind of winding down here. What's next for you? You were talking about that you're gonna work on the sequel, but what's are you going on any book tours or anything like that? Are you doing the rounds?
Well, we're having a book launch. Me and Nick Cutter, Craig Davidson is his actual name, but fans of more sort of straightforward horror will know him as Nick Cutter. Did The Troop and The Deep and The Acolyte, and his new book is a Little Heaven. So me and him will be launching our respective books in Toronto at the Round, which is in Kensington Market on March 28th.
Okay.
So that's kind of the book launch that we're going to do. And I might have one in my hometown here. Well, not hometown, but place where I now live, Peterborough. I'm not sure when that will happen, but I might get Craig out for that one as well. He's up for it. And then I'm not sure. I think Jim Moore and I had talked about, maybe trying to get, because we're both with Angry Robot, and we were, thinking about maybe having, because Sandra and I go to ReaderCon, and then we go to NeCon, which is just like a week apart. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, if we're going to be there anyway, maybe see if we can organize a few bookstore signings or something in that area. So that's sort of the Boston area-ish.
Yeah.
So those, but because of Chizine, we're in a lot of, we do a lot of conventions, or actually we used to do a lot more than we're going to be doing in the future. We're trying to cut back a little bit, but we're still going to be going to a fair amount of them. And so I'll be there, and I'll have my books, and so anyone who wants one, personalized or whatever,
yeah,
or just an autograph for eBay, that's fine too. Yeah. So no real sort of book tour,
no,
per se, but I'll be around at various conventions and having book launch and blah blah blah. So yeah, and then so in terms of what I'll be writing next, I think I'll be concentrating on the fourth novel, which is actually called Lake of Spaces, A Wood of Nothing, and it's from, I heard it at the start of a Clive Barker novel, the Damnation Game, and I think it's a W.B. Yeats quote.
Okay,
and
yeah.
it just that one line from the poem The Hourglass just stuck with me, and I just started writing a book, and then I was like, "Ooh, that'd be a cool thing to call the book."
Yeah.
So I called the book that, and now I'm kind of writing it to that title.
Yeah.
It's kind of an odd to do it, but it's an odd book.
Yeah, no, actually, I was talking to Bradley W.A.R.G today.
Yeah.
That I saw that you're friends with on Facebook.
Yeah.
Although
I don't really know him. But
no, that's what he said too.
I know the name.
Yeah. When we were talking about that, we were talking about different ways of approaching a story.
Yeah.
And I often write with music in my head.
Yeah.
So I'll have usually the chapters will have titles of specific songs.
Okay, yeah.
And I kind of work out that every chapter should kind of make you feel what the song makes me feel.
That's it. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah. And so I don't know. That's just kind of how it's developed. So I have these long playlists that I sit with. So
are you able to actually have music on with lyrics and stuff?
Yeah,
because I can't do that.
No, I've understood that a lot of people can't.
No, because it's just always in my head, and then I just start writing, the lyrics. Yeah. Oh, gee, I wonder where I stole that from. Right? So,
yeah. No,
hard.
I've been able to kind of go past that, but usually because usually what happens is that one song is the one chapter. I'll just listen to the song first, and then I don't play it again. I just listen to it when I start writing, and then I leave it. And then the next time I start writing on that chapter again, I'll pick it up again just to remember what I'm looking for, what the sensation is.
Right.
So that's so that is. So if
do it.
Yeah. What if where can people find you on social medias if they want to follow you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's where I'm most active. And if you just type in my name, it'll. I think it's me, and there's like two other guys in the world with my name that are on Facebook. So it'll be pretty easy to spot me because they'll probably have my book cover and some other like weird image. So yeah, just Brett Savory in Facebook, and I think I'm just at and then my name again, Brett Savory for Twitter. So easy to find. Easy to find me. Yeah. And my website is brettsavory.com. So also easy to get to.
Yeah, and then one can go to Chizine.
Yes, ChizinePub.com for the publishing company.
Yeah. And what would somebody find there if they'd be interested in seeing what do you have, what is on offer?
Oh yeah, well we've got we just did a new website. We'd had an old one for quite a while, and I finally got around to doing a new like WordPress one. So it's a lot prettier and more up to date now than it was. So it's more of a brochure site. I mean, it's got all the info for all the books. It's got the latest catalog. So we're still adding a lot to it. A lot of the older titles need actual like book pages and that, but it's all there. It's all fully functional, and you can get all the info on all of our stuff and all of the links where you can buy and all that. So yeah, go buy some Chizine, yo.
Well, thanks for doing the interview, and best of luck for you in the future, and hopefully maybe we'll talk to you again when the next book launches.
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. Well, that was the show for this time. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Brett Savory for taking the time out to talk with us. And I would like to thank Angry Robot Books for setting all this up. Music used today was Elliot Berger, and this figure provided by No Copyright Sounds. If you'd like to help out, or if you'd like to contribute to the Guild, then you can contact us through our Facebook page or through our homepage, and even follow us on Twitter and obviously on Instagram as well. All those things will be provided in the show notes. And I hope to see you down the line for another interview, whatever that may be, or who we may talk to. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.